think you trust in my self-righteous suicide. I cried when angels deserve to die. Well, howdy! That there was a classic country ditty called Chop Suey. And what I'm doing right now is ridiculous country accent because in my mind, all farmers are cowboys and all cowboys are farmers. Why am I doing this? Because today we're making Farmer's Chop Suey. Suey! Today's recipe for Farmer's Chop Suey comes to us from 300 Tasty Healthful Dairy Dishes, published in 1940. So when I first read this recipe, I literally lost my shit. Where did it go? Going into it, I had the basic understanding that chop suey was, in essence, the dish that introduced Chinese cuisine to most North Americans in the late 1800s. Many authors and food historians have already tackled the history of chop suey, far better and more complete than I ever could. But for a relatively concise history of chop suey, check out the soy sauce chapter in Sarah Lohman's book, 8 Flavors. So with all this swimming around in my head, I look at the recipe for Farmer's Chop Suey and this is what I see. And at first I thought, that doesn't look like a chop suey recipe I know. And then I thought, it's a fucking salad. Convinced that this was some shameless act of cultural appropriation by our dairy industry overlords, I immediately started rage Googling. But what I found was far less nefarious and far more inspiring. Right off the bat, I learned that this dish has another name, Jewish chop suey. So, what's the deal with it being called Jewish chop suey? I'm gonna try and sum up everything I learned in a borderline coherent manner, and if you have personal experience with this dish and personal memories, please, please, please let me know in the comments. I think it's so interesting. So as I mentioned earlier, chop suey was all the rage at the turn of the 20th century. Around the same time, the United States was seeing its first big waves of Eastern European Jews. Like any culture, those who emigrate bring with them not only their personal possessions and customs, but also their recipes and cuisine. And many of these Eastern European Jews brought with them a recipe for a staple dish with no special or specific name that involved seasonable vegetables and a ubiquitous sour cream known as smetana. So to recap, you've got this going on, and you've got chop suey, which is gaining popularity as a worldly modern food across all communities. Everyone's eating it, including all these different immigrant groups. And so at some point along the way, different immigrant communities started taking whatever fast, go-to staple recipe they had and just started adding the words chop suey to it. For example, if you just do a Google search, you'll see that there's Danish chop suey, Finnish chop suey, German chop suey, which brings us back to that aforementioned recipe involving seasonable vegetables and smetana, because that is what eventually became known as Jewish chop suey. Why that dish? Maybe it was to make a humble but universally enjoyed dish more modern or relevant, or maybe it was done as an in-joke. I don't know, no one really knows. And as far as how that became known as Farmer's Chop Suey, again, there's no definitive answer. Some think it's because some recipes call for farmer's cheese, which in the US is basically just pressed cottage cheese, or maybe it's just as simple as the fact that, farmers grow vegetables and they raise dairy cows, and this dish is vegetables and dairy. Either way, there's no arguing that despite its apparent simplicity, Farmer's Chop Suey actually has a winding history and, to me at least, represents a beautiful interaction between different cultural groups who made something new together through the shared love of food. So, now that I've lost you, it's time that we make this recipe for Farmer's Chop Suey. As always, I've left the ingredients and the recipes in the description if you want to follow along. So Farmer's Chop Suey is pretty easy to make since it's really just a bunch of vegetables cut up in different ways. For this version, we'll need shredded lettuce, sliced radishes, diced cucumbers, diced green peppers, and lastly, shredded carrots. In addition to our team of veggies, we're going to need 2 recipes worth of sour cream dressing. Now, I didn't film myself making this, but here's the recipe. It's from the same cookbook as Farmer's Chop Suey. As you can see, it's mostly sour cream and sugar, because America. With that, we can throw everything into a giant bowl and start mixing to combine, folding and scraping down the sides to make sure every veggie morsel is covered in that sweet, sweet sour cream dressing, which shouldn't be too hard since the vegetable to dressing ratio is about 1:1. Once that's combined, we need to find a serving dish that really captures the pastel fever of the 1950s. Sure, that'll do. Go ahead and pour the chop suey into the dish and be sure to spend too much time trying to smooth out an uncontrollable heap of chopped vegetable goop. And voila, we've made farmer's chop suey. Oh hey, hi. Shall we? Serve up a little bit. Let me get my little tasting rubric out. Okay, visually, it's very sloppy looking. Now for the smell test. It smells good. It smells fresh. You can smell the fresh vegetables, plus the tanginess of the sour cream dressing. It smells like coleslaw. Sound? Oh shit. Ooh. Ooh. See, I get that sound isolated a little bit better for you. It sounds like how it looks. Wet. Okay, so now for the taste test. It tastes pretty good. The vegetables that are there, you're tasting them kind of individually, but what you're mostly tasting is that sour cream dressing. It kind of tastes like these vegetables are mixed with like cream cheese frosting. It's pretty overpowering. That's pretty much all I'm tasting. Other recipes I saw for this, like in the old Jewish cookbooks, call for just plain sour cream or cottage cheese or a combination of both. Speaking of which, what I have here are some alternatives to taste also. I also have a little cup of cottage cheese, and then I also have a little bowl of farmer's cheese. So I'm going to try some different combos of that. Testing addition of cottage cheese in 3, 2, 1. I definitely like that better. Cuts the sweetness down a little bit. Now I'm going to mix in the farmer's cheese. If you recall, I said that one of the ideas for why it became known as farmer's chop suey is because it included sour cream, cottage cheese, and farmer's cheese. So let's see how this bad boy tastes. And go. Yeah, I like that too. It tastes pretty good this way. It kind of adds like a semi salty ricotta type feel to the dish. And now we're going to try it on some pumpernickel. Yeah, that's what's up. The bread is definitely necessary. That bready bitter taste of pumpernickel helps really cut down on the sweet, sour tanginess of the dish. It's pretty solid. Now, one thing I noticed while I was researching is that pretty much every other recipe I saw called for either red onion or more commonly scallions. And I think the addition of that would make this fucking bomb. Like, this needs a little bit of that oniony sharpness to kind of cut through it. I think that would really make this perfect. That and the addition of maybe cottage cheese and farmer's cheese and maybe reducing the sugar or eliminating the sugar altogether. So what's the verdict? Rip or resurrect? I'm giving this a solid resurrect. I would really like to see this dish, regain popularity because the history, just in those words alone, is so rich. And I think that's really cool. It's just a dish. It's just vegetables and sour cream, and it means so much more than that. Hope you learned something. Hope you make this. If you're lactose intolerant, don't make this. You will shit all over yourself, I guarantee it. It's all liquid cheese, and it'll stay liquid cheese when it comes out the other side. Okay? Cool. Love you guys.